Hello and welcome to the Altered State Podcast. My name is Walt Kala. I'm a psychedelic guide and facilitator, and today I will be your host. And today's a little bit of a solo podcast. If you're starting a new podcast, it can be hard to find guests, but there's plenty to cover here. And altered states are interesting, but the context of the original state is what I want to discuss with you today. And the original state can be as simple as where we often come from, seeing it as our day to day lives, the consciousness we find ourselves in this moment. But I want to go into the original state, which is deeper than just our regular day to day consciousness and something you can experience usually on psychedelics. And it's more the state of consciousness we find ourselves before we get here. It's not a state of consciousness that is the human experience. And from this explanation, the human experience is actually an altered state in itself already. Um, and it's the non dual philosophy that I have been researching for more than a decade. I've been into this type of philosophy. First of all, don't believe anything I say just straight at it. These are really useful concepts when you learn about them yourself and integrate them with the rest of your life. And they kind of fit everywhere in some way. And it's a wonderful philosophy, but don't just believe everything I say and take it as it is. Stuff is supposed to be experienced yourself and integrated. I always say truth is not something you could just tell someone, right? Truth is something you experience with your entire being, and you should be able to seek out that direct experience and test this for yourself. Uh, it's not something. Truth is not something you can tell someone. It's almost not helpful. Just like, here's the truth, like that's nice, but like I don't have the experience, right? I always say, look at, for example, if you take the flower of life symbol. It's a beautiful symbol, but and you can show it to someone, right? So like let's say the flower of life symbol is the truth, right? And you're showing this to someone and showing someone the truth, but they can't see it like you see it. If you've had the direct experience uh, of this symbol, the flower of life, and you've seen it in its 5D elements. Like on psychedelics, you can experience the flower of life and you can see it moving in 5 dimensions, and you can see how reality is made up out of this structure, out of this beautiful symmetry, this sacred geometry that is happening and occurring and moving and breathing, and really that it is alive. But if you're just in your regular everyday consciousness and you show this symbol to someone, it's like, yes, it's the truth, but they don't have the experience of it. The truth has to be experienced. Talking about non-duality, where do we start? What's the simplest way to explain this? Well, the simplest way to explain non-duality is as everything that is and everything that is not. So everything that is and everything that is not. And then I remember having a beautiful realization of this as a child. This is where my fascination with non-duality started. I remember I was around 12 years old or something, being in the woods. I was on a playground in the Netherlands on a swing. And it's funny, that was on the pendulum. So I had this realization. I was like, everything is nothing and nothing is everything. And I probably spent at least an hour just repeating that to myself and realizing the implications of that statement as that nothing cannot exist without something, because nothing is only nothing in contrast to something, and something cannot exist without everything, because the something is part of everything. And this is just pure logic, but these paradoxes and the meaning in them go so much deeper than that. Yes, and when you do experiment with this for yourself and you do deeper learning and you have direct experiences, you'll start to notice that this cashmere running around in the background, so cute. Um, you develop a deeper and deeper noetic truth, which is the sense of truth that is deeper connected to intuition, but it's more grounded in your being. Like when you experience noetic truth on psychedelics, it's not like a question, do I think it's true? Do I know it's true? It's like deeper than knowing. It's like where words fail to express how deeply you know something. Like this is the ineffable. It is ineffable truth. It is so, it's just it's beyond truth. Like words fail to explain one of these states. This is one of the things where words will fail to really explain noetic truth. Um, but as you have these experiences more and more, and you test this for yourself, you integrate this deeper, and you become more of it. Quite literally, you embody it. Um, and one of the beautiful things about non-duality is that it essentially teaches that you are God. Now, I am God is a very contested statement, right? But to give this full context is extremely important, because you are God, but so is the cockroach, and so is everything else. It essentially doesn't make it's not a grand statement. It doesn't make you or anyone or anything very special. Everything is a unique representation of the divine. Everything is a unique representation of God, right? But it's not special that it is God. It's because everything is God, and everything that is not God is God as well. So, a beautiful conversation had in the comments with Jordan Thornton, who's a wonderful inner work coach, and I love following his work. Goes very deep, and what I love about him is he's especially grounded. And he talks about spiritual narcissism, and this is where this often can lead. We can have this realization in altered states that we are God, and it can be so profound when we realize it, and the depth of it, and the infinite, unlimited nature within ourselves, and when we're exploring that, can feel very grandiose, but it's not grounded. It becomes tied to narcissism, and our own ego and shadow that's already at work then gets projected into the spiritual field. So you see a lot of people do that, right? And it's normal, because when we start to realize that we are spiritual beings, and often we've had lives before that where we were playing with identity in a way, like, oh, I am my job, and I like to work out, and I'm this kind of person and that kind of person. And then when we start to realize we're spiritual beings, we take, it's the note at the door says before you enter the spiritual field, it's like, leave your ego at the door. But you pretend that you leave your ego at the door, but really you put as much effort as you can into cramming it through the keyhole. You just cram that ego through the keyhole, and now you create a spiritual identity that you then present to the world. And that has a lot of shadow aspects. So a lot of narcissism and a lot of virtue signaling going on in the spiritual world. And that makes things very confusing, because a lot of that is pretending you believe or have an understanding in things that you don't really have an understanding in. I have had wonderful direct experiences of things that most people don't believe in, and I don't want you to believe in if you don't have a direct experience, and there's also things I absolutely don't know any jack shit about. Like, I think crystals are amazing, and I see a lot of people talk about them and their powers and everything, and I want to believe them, but I haven't had a direct experience. So I don't, like, if I happen to have a direct experience tomorrow and I understand it more deeply, then I may share something. But right now, I'm not going to tell you, like, hey, do this with this crystal or something. That's like, I think they're cool, and I think they're interesting and everything, but I don't talk about stuff that I don't understand well enough. Anyway, so narcissism and virtue signaling are extremely prevalent in the spiritual field, and I'm sure everyone wants to, like, the same social dynamics you see everywhere else get replicated here, and you still get looked at weirdly if you are deeper integrated with truth, and you try to actually call people out on their bullshit. And there should be a lot of calling out of bullshit in the spiritual field, and we should always aim to give proper context. And every every virtue signaler will end up in the spiritual field because it's the highest virtue to signal. So every psychopath, every narcissist, if given long enough, if they're not already thriving in another field, eventually they'll end up doing this spirituality thing, but they'll just do the facade off and not really be well integrated. And often the way that I see this is like someone who's saying, I am God, I am in this divinity. They'll only really reflect and lean towards the positive and try to shy away, run away from, and repress the negative. That's one very common one that I've seen, because narcissists often don't really have a real way of dealing with feedback and integrating their shadow as well. So they repress. These are just mental patterns, right? If you're a narcissist, you don't have to be a narcissist forever. You can choose to change that if you wish to, right? It's going to be difficult because it's a mental pattern that you've built, right? But you can change it. You can absolutely change it. And it's not a damnation of narcissists, right? Non-duality also calls us to recognize ourselves in everyone else, no matter how like apprehensive their deeds were from our point of view. Because that's another thing about non-duality, like good or bad cease to exist when you really look at the implications of it. Back to spiritual narcissism, however, for a little bit though, because I had a wonderful conversation about this, because in some way, when you say I am God, you can use it as a shield of preventing you from actually doing the inner work. And Jordan did a really wonderful way of explaining this in a grounded manner. So you can use the realization of I'm God as some kind of a shield from actually doing the inner work. And you can be in this lofty philosophical space and have these wonderful conversations online. When I actually had to be in the gym and I was writing here for like an hour or two, it was a form of procrastination, being in this space where it actually affects you, right? So we want to be in this this wonderful space of I am God, I'm in these beautiful insights, but then you have to actually embody it and be able to address your shadow, own your shadow, right? Take full responsibility for every part of yourself. And that's often what's very hard to do for people who are lean too much in the I am God in a narcissistic way and not the I am God and so is everything else. Because the so is everything else part is actually more, is in some sense more important than just the I am God, right? And one really useful way of seeing this is holons. So what is a holon? What is the I am God? Because I am God doesn't really explain the full thing. I am God in the sense that I am part of God. The same way that my hand is a part of me. So the concept of holons is a really beautiful framework that helps you understand non-duality. So my hand is a whole, but also a part of my arm. My arm is a whole, but also a part of my body. My body is a whole, but it is also part of the rest of my being, right? My mind, everything that's going on here energetically, like your energetic body, the subtle body, some would call. I am a part of my family, and then my family is part of society. This society is part of the world, so on and so on and so on. It can go out infinitely. One of the resources I'd recommend you check out for understanding as I talk about holons, Leo Gura does amazing videos on holons as well as non-duality in general and other philosophical inquiries as well. He provides really good psychedelic guidance as well. Another quick video that I recently found that's amazing on non-duality is The Truth of Everything, animated by Benjamin Davies. This is a very dense, short 4-minute video that I've watched a lot of times already. It's really good. uses a little bit of a different language, a different vocabulary than I usually use. So that's wonderful because it adds, right? The wonderful explanation. Another reason I wanted to talk about this specifically is, why is it important that we understand ourselves as the non-dual God? Why is that an important philosophy to at least be open to? And it's that when you're working with altered states, psychedelics offer you kind of a doorway into infinity. And when you have access to a perspective that is not limited in any sense, right? Non-duality is the absolute non-limitation of all. Non-duality implies infinity too. And having an unlimited perspective, having access to that while you're working with psychedelics, while you're working with altered states, just allows you to drop your limited beliefs more easily, right? It's like, I'm going to put this limited belief down now and just experiment with an unlimited being. So understanding non-duality and seeing the world as a unity that's also made out of separation at the same time, right? Non-duality is both the separate and the oneness. And in fact, this is paradox. But in non-duality, paradox is the rule, not the exception. Paradox, actually, when you recognize paradox, you're actually very close to truth. You're at the center of any aspect. One way that I recently observed a paradox, which is beautiful in non-duality, is that in order to create your best life, in order to create a good business, in order to create your best life, as I said, with your business, with everything that's included in it, you need extremely good boundaries with yourself and with people. But what are boundaries but the definitions of how we are separate between these different subjects? There's a boundary between my morning routine and what I'm doing in the afternoon. There's a boundary between how I communicate with you versus how I communicate with my wife. Right? There's a boundary between how I communicate with my wife versus how I communicate with my family, with society. And all of these very unique, circumstantial, and subjective realities that I'm interacting with. By creating these boundaries, I'm interacting with the world around me in a healthier way. It is healthiest for myself, and it is healthiest for the world around me. Because once I can only support the world around me when I am well supported, right? So it allows you to interact with the world that in a way that is holistically the best outcome for everyone involved. So in a sense, to be able to be one with the world the most, you have to be very good at being separate. In order to be one, you have to be really fucking good at being separate and defining that separation, practicing, integrating, becoming. So we can become one through separation. Paradox. Beautiful example of paradox in self-development sense. Another thing about non-duality is there's no real good or evil. Everything is true from its current subjective point of view. Now, what is that? No good and evil. How does that work? For something to be truly good, it has to be good in all scenarios for all parties involved. But good depends on your individual, subjective opinion of what is good. What is good for you is not what someone else considers good. And it depends on your state of awareness. Because if you are in a state where you're trying to dominate the world, you're seeing everything as separate and only as separate, not as unity. You don't see the both and. It's a unity and separation at the same time. And you're conquering, you're in the 1500s or something, and you're conquering someone else. What you see as good is putting the fear into people and doing really, like, committing some terrible acts of violence. But you're able to see that as good. For you, in that subjective circumstance, that is good. But at the very obvious level, it's not necessarily good for the people being slaughtered, you know? And good kind of falls apart. There's good and bad only in the subjective sense, only to the subject that is perceiving it. This is good for me, this is bad for me. Positive, negative experience. But in the ultimate sense, there is no real good or evil there. If good and evil don't exist, how do we create heaven? Right? How do we create a world that is truly good? The wonderful thing is that free will and choice still exists. And once you become aware of the non-dual nature of reality, you're much more likely to choose a better expression of yourself. You realize there's no true good and evil. There's no judgment anymore towards, doing something that you would view as not great. But why would you do something that you view as not great for yourself anyway? Well, there's a lot of shadow aspects there. But you choose the thing that you think is best because you have the vision to. A lot of the choices that aren't that great, we make often from an unconscious or incomplete state, right? But it's still the highest knowledge that we have at that time. We don't make decisions in the moment that we think are bad decisions. It's the highest decision making we have access to at that time. This is why guilt doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is why, looking back, I should have made this other decision. Yeah, but you didn't because you didn't know back then, and that's okay. That is really all I wanted to discuss today. If you take anything away from this conversation, I hope you're interested and open to non-duality, recognizing the both and perspective in each moment in life, because you are both God and you are also a monkey and an animal, and you have both sides. The good and the bad, the negative and the positive experience. You have the complete contrast within you. If you take that away, then this was a successful podcast. I want to thank you so much for being here with a shorter podcast. I want to wish you a wonderful day. Bye-bye.